I stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around my chipped blue teacup, the one with the little rose painted on the side, the one she gave me years ago on Mother's Day. The warmth pressed into my palms, grounding me. The muted sunlight filtered through the gauzy curtains, soft and slow, like it hadn't heard what she just said. "Why are you even here?" The words didn't shout. They didn't echo. They just landed, heavy, final. My fingers didn't move. The hum of the fridge was louder than usual, or maybe everything else had just gone quiet. Steam rose from my cup, curling toward the ceiling like it was trying to leave before I could. I didn't look up right away. My eyes stayed fixed on that little chip in the handle, the one I'd always meant to glue. It didn't hurt, not at first. It just sat there. Her words and the steam both drifted into nothing. I blinked. Once. Slowly. The clink of ceramic against the tile broke the stillness when I set the cup down, too carefully. I hadn't even taken a sip. She didn't repeat herself. She didn't have to. My breath caught. Not from anger, not even shock, really. It felt like the moment you slip your hand into a winter pond without thinking. That sting of sudden cold, that pull in your chest. I turned my head, just slightly, but her back was already to me. She was washing a dish that didn't need it, scrubbing something invisible, like I was. Still, my hands held steady. Years of practice, bottle feeding, wiping tears, tying shoes with gentle fingers. You learn to keep moving even when your heart hesitates, but inside, I felt it, something unraveling, like a thread pulled too long from a sweater you once loved. I looked down again. The tea leaves were swirling slowly at the bottom of the cup. I stared at them like they might spell out an answer, like they might explain how we ended up here. Nothing spoke. The breeze pushed through the cracked window beside the stove, stirring. The curtain just a little. It smelled like chimney smoke and dry leaves, the first real scent of fall. She still hadn't turned around. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. But something in me shifted. Not a break. Not even a bruise. Just that slow, invisible turning, like when a photograph starts to fade in the sunlight. You don't notice at first, and then one day, the face is just softer, distant. I stood still, listening to the silence between us, the kind that didn't beg for answers anymore. The wall clock ticked gently behind me. Tick, tick. The second. Hand moved forward as if nothing had changed. But I had. The tea had gone cold. My breath felt shallow. I didn't belong in that kitchen anymore. Not the way I used to. Not as a mother who could fix things with a warm plate or a softer tone. Didn't move. I just felt the shape of the room change around me. Time didn't wait. And neither, I realized, could I. I can still hear it sometimes, her laugh. That tiny, bubbling giggle that came from somewhere deep in her belly, like it couldn't wait to come out. She used to laugh at everything back then. When the dog sneezed, when I made silly voices, when I rocked the chair just a little too fast. It wasn't just sound. It was sunlight wrapped in sound. She'd curl into me after a bath, her hair damp and smelling like baby shampoo, all wrapped up in that faded yellow towel with the duck on the corner. I'd sit in the rocker with her pressed against my chest, her tiny heartbeat fluttering like a hummingbird against mine. The scent of warm milk and talcum powder filled the room. Her fingers would find the edge of my collar and just rest there, like that was her anchor. "I love you, Mama," she'd mumble, barely awake, voice sticky with sleep. "I love you more," I'd whisper, kissing the top of her head where the hair still whirled in the back. The floor creaked with every motion of the rocker, slow and steady, the same rhythm as my heart. I didn't need anything else. In those quiet afternoons, I was everything she needed, and she was everything I didn't know I was missing. The breeze would catch the corner of the curtain, making it dance just a little. Light shifted on the nursery wall, and I remember thinking, This is the best it'll ever be. I didn't say it out loud, but I felt it settle deep in my bones. I used to believe love like that stayed. That once a child looked at you like that, they never could unsee you. But now, the silence in this house makes me wonder if that was ever true. Maybe it was only true for a while. Maybe that laugh belonged to a version of her that I'll never get back. The laundry always smelled the same. Warm, soft, like fresh cotton and the ghost of spring. We'd sit cross-legged on the carpet, the sun slipping through the lace curtains in little stripes. The washer would hum from the other room, a steady rhythm that felt like background music to our little life. I'd pull out the tiniest socks first, always the socks. "One for you," I'd say, handing her a pair, "and one for me." She'd giggle and match them with more care than most grown-ups I know. I used to watch her fingers pinch the corners, her tongue sticking out in concentration. There was something holy about it, ordinary but holy. "Are we almost done, Mama?" she'd ask, even though I knew she never really wanted to be. "Almost," I'd smile. "One more shirt and a hug break." We'd pause. Every time. Her arms would wrap around my neck like it was tradition. And maybe it was. We folded her little overalls and her soft pajamas, the ones with the tiny moons on them. Sometimes she'd ask about the tags. "Why does it say 3T?" "Because you're 3, I'd say. She'd nod like that was the smartest thing she'd ever heard. The scent of detergent clung to our hands, and I loved it. I loved everything about it, the ritual, the repetition, the fact that I was needed, chosen, that something so small could feel so full. Afterwards, we'd stack the clothes in her drawers, neat and quiet. She'd always slip one sock into the wrong drawer on purpose and grin, waiting for me to find it. "Wasn't me," she'd say, trying not to laugh. I'd tickle her gently, and the house would ring with her laughter. Those days were not dramatic or remarkable. But they made me feel full. They gave me rhythm, meaning, and a place to belong. And now? The washer still hums sometimes, but the clothes are all mine. And the silence? It doesn't giggle anymore. She used to love helping me bake. I'd pull the chair up to the counter, her tiny hands barely able to hold the spoon, but she stirred like it was a mission. Flour dusted her hair like snowfall, and her smile, sticky with brown sugar, lit up the kitchen better than the overhead light. "Can I crack the egg?" she asked, eyes wide. "Only if you promise not to eat the shell," I said, handing it over like a crown jewel. She'd giggle, the sound sharp and sweet, just like cinnamon. I watched her drop it into the bowl, half the yolk landing where it should, the rest clinging to her fingers. The oven ticked as it warmed, and the smell of banana bread began to drift out, vanilla, butter, and home. She leaned her cheek on my arm while we waited, breath warm, eyes dreamy. "I wish we could eat it now," she sighed. "Some things," I said, brushing the flour from her forehead, "are worth waiting for. That memory lives in my senses. That scent? I still chase it. I tried making the same breed a few weeks ago. I even stood in the same spot, but the kitchen felt emptier. The chair stayed pushed in. The air was still, and when I pulled the loaf out, I realized the taste wasn't missing. She was. It was a warm night, one of those summer evenings where the air feels like it's holding you in a soft, quiet hug. The stars were coming out, one by one, and I had just brushed out her hair after her bath. The scent of lavender lotion clung to the air, mixing with her giggles as I tucked her in. "Can you stay until I fall asleep?" she asked. I smiled and nodded, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "Always." She reached for my hand without looking, just knowing I'd be there. That's what it meant to be her mother then, to be the constant she didn't question. I sang her favorite lullaby under my breath, the one my mother used to hum to me. Her eyes fluttered closed, then open again, as if sleep was tiptoeing around. "Us. I had a dream," she whispered, "that we lived in a house made of books." "What kind of books?" I asked. All the ones you read to me. I laughed quietly. That would be the best house. She nodded once, slowly, and fell asleep holding my pinky. That was when I knew what it felt like to be someone's safe place, someone's beginning and end. Now, on nights when sleep won't come for me, I think about that moment, and I wonder when I stopped being her always. The porch swings squeaked gently as we rocked back and forth, just enough to make the wooden slats hum beneath us. She sat beside me, her legs dangling, toes not yet long enough to reach the floor. The scent of night jasmine floated in from the garden, and crickets sang their evening tune. "Want to hear my new story?" she asked, her voice just above a whisper. "Always," I said, folding my hands in my lap. She leaned closer, conspiratorial. "It's about a girl who finds a cat that's actually a queen." "A cat queen?" I smiled. "That's a new one." She grinned, proud. "She rules the kingdom of pillows." I listened as she spun her tale, her hands moving with the rhythm of her imagination. The stars blinked above us, slow and soft, and I swear her dreams floated up with them, big, beautiful things I never wanted to interrupt. She rested her head on my shoulder when she ran out of words. And for a moment the world stilled. I believed in everything she told me. I believed in us. She scraped her knee on the driveway, and before I could even stand, she came flying toward me. Arms out. Tears are already spilling. "I didn't mean to fall," she sobbed. "Oh, honey," I whispered, gathering her in. "Falling's not the part that matters." I cleaned her wound, kissed her forehead, and the way she looked at me, like I was a lighthouse and the world was full of storm. She used to ask me everything. Why does the moon change shapes? What rain tasted like? Whether bees got tired. "Do bees sleep?" she once asked. "Only when they know someone else is watching. The hive." She stared at me like I knew everything. Back then, I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to be there. Her compass, her map, even on my tired days, even when my back aches and I mixed up the laundry. She reached for me first. Now, she reaches for silence, or her phone, or the door, and I wonder, when did I stop being home? It's strange how something that felt so unshakable could change. Love, I thought, was a kind of forever. Now I sit in the quiet and ask myself questions I don't want to answer. Have you ever felt this way? Tell me below. She used to look at me when I spoke, eyes steady, even if she didn't always agree. Now, I'd talk, and her gaze would float, past me, around me, never quite landing. I'd notice it in the little moments, the ones I wish I could forget. At the kitchen table, while the coffee went cold, I'd mention something simple, like how the tomatoes needed pruning, or how I saw Mrs. Langley's dog loose again, and she'd nod, but her fingers kept scrolling her phone, like my voice was background noise, like I'd become part of the furniture. "Did you hear me?" I asked one morning, my voice softer than I meant. She replied, not even looking up. The air between us didn't feel angry, just still like porcelain, shiny, smooth, and cold to the touch. I stirred my coffee again, even though the sugar had long settled at the bottom. The spoon tapped the side of the mug, just loud enough to fill the silence. The sun outside tried to break, through the clouds but couldn't quite manage. A stripe of weak light stretched across the table, landing between us like a line neither one of us wanted to cross. She talked about errands next, groceries, bills, some meeting she had later. I nodded too, pretended I was listening, even though my thoughts were caught in the hollow space her eyes used to fill. This wasn't a fight. It wasn't even tension. It was a distance in disguise. Polite distance. I looked at the clock. It ticked, like it always had, but louder now, each second pressing against my ribs. I took another sip of lukewarm coffee, and she pushed back her chair. "I'll be back by 3, she said. I smiled, the kind you give a stranger who holds the door, open, and as she left, I stared at the space where her eyes used to meet mine. I picked out the ribbon carefully, soft teal, her favorite. The little sachet of lavender I tucked in was one she used to keep under her pillow when she couldn't sleep. I folded the scarf just right, the edges even, the print something I thought would bring back a little memory. Just a small gift. Nothing extravagant. Just a mother remembering. I left it on the counter near the coffee machine where she always started her day. There was no note. I didn't need one. I thought she'd know. That first day, she walked past it. I figured she was in a hurry. The second day, it was still there, untouched, its edges just barely curled from the morning sun through the kitchen window. By the third, I moved it to the side, near the fruit bowl. Maybe she didn't see it. Maybe her eyes were tired. Maybe mine were too hopeful. I waited. "Did you get a chance to open the little thing I left?" I asked, casually, trying to sound breezy. She didn't look up from her phone. "Oh yeah, I saw it. I've just been swamped." I nodded. No rush. But the ribbon never moved. The kitchen smelled like lemon and dust that afternoon, the windows sweating slightly from the heat outside pressing against the glass. I wiped the counter around the gift, but didn't touch it. She came in later, grabbed an apple, and left again. The scarf sat quietly between us, like a question that neither of us wanted to ask. I wanted to believe she was just distracted. That time had nothing to do with affection. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't the gift that hurt. It was the silence around it. The way love, once needed like air, could now sit unopened, untouched, like a book she didn't have time for anymore. She chuckled when I folded the towels. Not a mean laugh, just one of those tight little exhalations that lets you know you've become amusing. I was halfway through rolling them the way my mother taught me, tight, ends tucked in so they stacked just right. "Mom," she said, grinning. "No one does it like that anymore," I smiled back. "Well, it works," she shook her head. "You and your towel rolls, you're so precise." Later that evening, when I said grace before dinner, her eyes drifted to the TV. She didn't mock it outright, but I saw the flicker of something in her expression, like it was quaint, outdated. "Just eat, Mom," she mumbled, already spooning. "Stew into her bowl." "I always have," I replied quietly. The room glowed in soft yellow from the side lamp, the kind of light that makes everything look a little older. The stew smelled rich, but neither of us commented on the taste. The background hum of the television filled the space where our conversations used to be. She said the chicken was a little dry. I nodded, though I'd tasted it twice. "It's your old recipe, remember?" I said. "Oh," she paused. "I guess I just don't cook that way anymore." I smiled again, even though something inside me slipped. It's funny how love doesn't leave in one grand exit. It unravels, stitch by stitch. A comment here, a rolled eye there. You hold on to the thread, hoping it'll tie itself back together. But sometimes you realize you're the only one holding it. She said it gently, like a soft landing after a long fall. We were sitting in the living room, the rain barely whispering against the windows. She curled her legs beneath her on the couch, scrolling something on her phone, not looking at me when she spoke. "Maybe you should think about somewhere quieter." My fingers stilled on the blanket in my lap. It smelled like wool and lavender, fresh from the dryer, still warm in spots. I waited, hoping she'd laugh or backtrack or say she was joking. She didn't. I turned to her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "I just think it might be nice for you. A place where people your age can, connect. Connect. Like I wasn't already here. Like I hadn't been sitting at the same table, in the same room, loving her with the same quiet patience since the day she was born." "Somewhere quieter," I repeated, the words catching in my chest like a hiccup that wouldn't pass. "I'm not trying to hurt you," she added quickly, finally glancing up. "It's just, you deserve peace, Mom." I smiled at that. Peace. as if I hadn't already built my whole world around hers. I looked around the room. The cushions sagged a little on the edges where I always sat. The old photo frames tilted. Slightly on the shelf. Everything had my fingerprints, and yet suddenly, none of it felt mine. The rain outside kept falling, steady and slow. Inside, my heart pressed against the quiet, trying not to shatter. "Why are you even here?" She didn't shout. She just said it, like a question that had been sitting at the edge of her lips for too long. I was rinsing out a teacup, watching the sink fill with little swirls of soap bubbles. The sky outside had gone soft and gray, dusk settling in like a blanket. Her voice came from behind me, low, almost hesitant. I turned slowly, cloth still in hand, water dripping gently onto the floor. "I'm sorry," I said. She crossed her arms. "I mean, you're always around, just hovering." "I don't know." I stood still, my breath locked behind my ribs. The tea beside the sink had gone cold. I could smell the lemon still clinging to the rim, sharp and sweet. "I didn't realize I was in the way," I said. She shook her head. "That's not what I meant. But the rest of the sentence never came, and maybe it didn't need to. Her words settled over the room like dust on an unused chair. Quiet, unshakable. I stared at her for a moment, searching for the child who once ran to me in storms. But all I saw was distance. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just stood there, holding a dripping dishcloth and wondering when home stopped meaning me. The house had gone quiet in a way that didn't feel restful. It wasn't the kind of quiet that comes after laughter or after a long day. It was heavier, dense. The walls didn't echo anymore. They just listened. I moved from room to room, and every floorboard creaked like it had something to say, but no one left to hear it. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, soft and cold. Pale light pooled on the carpet like it was trying to remember where warmth used to live. I walked into the living room, trailing my fingertips along the back of the couch. The fabric still carried the shape of old evenings. Movie nights, warm. Blankets, the weight of another body leaning close. Now it just sagged. I passed the bookshelf. The same photos sat where they always had. Smiling faces, frozen in time. Her graduation, a beach trip, a baby bundled in pink. I didn't pick them up. I couldn't. It felt like I was visiting someone else's life, not my own. Like I was walking through a museum of memories, and nothing was roped off, but everything felt too sacred to touch. In the kitchen, the sink held one mug, rinsed and turned upside down. Mine. Only mine. I opened the window just a crack. The air outside smells like dry leaves and the sharp edge of fall. Even the wind had nothing to say. The silence didn't scare me. It knew me too well by now. It folded itself around me gently, like a blanket I hadn't asked for but couldn't shake off. And for the first time in a long while, I realized I didn't miss the noise. I missed being part of the reason it once existed. I stopped outside her bedroom without meaning to. The door was slightly ajar, just enough to invite a memory through. I reached for the handle, then paused. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. The kind that hums in your ears when everything else has stopped trying. Her bedspread was still there, the one I stitched by hand for her 12th birthday. Faded now, a little frayed on the edges. I remember the way she squealed when I first gave it to her, how she ran her fingers over the embroidery like it was magic. Now it just clung to the mattress, flat and undisturbed. I pushed the door open, with care, like the room might exhale dust if I moved too fast. The air smelled faintly of old fabric softener and something gone still, like when you open a box of memories that haven't seen light in years. No humming came from the closet. No thuds of footsteps or the sound of drawers opening and closing. Just the soft whisper of a draft moving past the window, too tired to rattle it. I sat at the edge of the bed for a moment. The mattress gave a little under my weight, like it remembered. Like it still waited. She used to lie here, reading aloud stories she half finished, asking me questions about the world she was building in her head. Now, the bookshelf was half empty, the titles gathering dust. I ran my palm gently over the pillow and felt nothing but cold cotton. There was no sadness in the air, just stillness, just dust where joy once danced. And I thought to myself, love, when it leaves, doesn't slam the door. Sometimes it just forgets to come back in. I set the table out of habit, not hunger. One place, one napkin, still folded. I poured the soup, potato and leek, her favorite once, and sat down, spoon resting against the bowl. The steam curled up into the quiet, then disappeared. The chair across from me stayed empty. Of course it did. It had been for weeks now, but something in me refused to stop hoping it wouldn't. I used to sit here and pass the butter, nod along to stories that twisted and turned like vines. The clatter of forks, the spilled water, the way she'd grown at my overcooked chicken and then eat it anyway. That used to be my symphony. Now, every sound I made felt exaggerated. The clink of my spoon in the bowl sounded too loud. I flinched, then chuckled at myself. The stew had cooled before I even tasted it. I took one bite, then set the spoon down. It wasn't bad, just pointless. The light above the table was dim, yellowing with age. The overhead fans spun lazily, casting long, slow-moving shadows against the wall. I looked up at them, wondering how they could feel more alive than me at that moment. The dishwasher hummed from the kitchen, a rhythm I used to sync my evenings with. But even that felt like it belonged to someone else now. I didn't feel fed. I didn't feel full. I felt forgotten, like a recipe no one used anymore. Sunday used to mean something. I'd wake up early and wait for the phone to ring. There'd be chatter, plans, updates, stories about traffic or work or the new neighbor's dog. Sometimes a visit, always a voice. Now, the phone just sat there, still and stubborn. I brewed tea and took it to the window, pretending not to glance at the cordless every minute or so. Outside, the sky was that flat kind of gray that never lifts. The trees barely moved. The street was empty. I wrapped both hands around the mug, even though the tea was cooling fast. It smelled like mint and something bittersweet I couldn't quite name. I told myself they were busy, that she was just tired, or maybe the kids were loud today. But the lie didn't hold. Not for long. Not when the clock ticked, and still nothing came. It's a strange kind of hunger, waiting for someone to remember you. By noon, I'd turned the volume up on the ringer just in case. I even checked the battery. It was fine. It was always fine. I sat back down and stared at the empty mug in my hands. The silence was thick, not angry, not even sad. Just heavy, like snow that wouldn't melt no matter how long the sun tried. I leaned back into the chair and told myself again, they're probably just busy. But I didn't believe it the way I used to. When I was a girl, I learned to read my mother by her back. She was always at the sink, or bent over in the garden, or seated on the porch, staring into some distance I couldn't see. She didn't turn much, didn't smile easily. Her love was like weather, present, but not always warm. I used to think I'd done something wrong. I remember once, standing in the kitchen doorway, holding a crayon drawing with both hands. "Mama," I said, "look what I made." She didn't. "Turn! Put it on the table," she called over her shoulder. "I'll see it later." She didn't. Back then, I promised myself I'd be different. But now, sitting in my living room, the walls heavy with silence, I saw her again, in me. Saw that same distance in my daughter's eyes. Not angry, just elsewhere. I didn't mean for it to happen. I loved myself. I showed up. I stayed. But sometimes, even when we do everything right, distance still sneaks in. I closed my eyes, and for a second, I could hear the clatter of pots from decades ago. Smell the boiled greens. See the back of my mother's dress, slightly wrinkled, never turning. And I felt a sting I hadn't felt in years. Not from her, but from myself. The lamp in the corner buzzed faintly, flickering like it couldn't make up its mind. The rest of the room was still, save for the soft rattle of wind against the windows. I sat in the chair by the bookshelf, wrapped in a throw I didn't remember, choosing. Maybe I stayed too long. Maybe I'd mistaken proximity for closeness. Maybe I wanted too much, or gave too much, or just lingered. I didn't want to think about it. But that's how doubt works. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It creeps in, soft as a sigh, curling up in the corners of your mind and settling there. I stared at the photograph on the side table. Her 3rd birthday, frosting on her cheeks, her hands clutching mine. I was her whole world once. Now I'm in an extra room, the background voice. The obligation. I shifted in my seat, feeling the weight of the questions I couldn't ask. Would she miss me if I left? Would she even notice? The room smelled like old paper and heating dust, the kind of smell that makes you feel older than you are. The kind that whispers of things long settled. The doubt didn't scream. It didn't cry. It just stayed. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't chase it away. The rain whispered against the window like someone gently knocking, soft, steady, as if asking permission to come in. But no one really was. I sat there with my hands folded neatly in my lap like I had somewhere to be, though I hadn't left this chair in hours. The overhead light buzzed faintly above, not quite bright enough to chase away the shadows. From the other room, I heard her voice, distant, muffled, lighter than it had been in days. She was on the phone. "Yeah, it'll be so much easier once we tear down that wall," she said. A short laugh. "No, she won't mind. Honestly, she probably won't be here much longer." I didn't move, didn't blink, just listened. She kept talking, plans, timelines. An excited tone I hadn't heard in months, but none of it was meant for me. My name never came up. There was no pause, no hesitation. It was like I'd already left, like the room I was in had gone transparent, and I was with it. I glanced toward the window. Rain still danced down the glass, tracing lines I could follow, but not change. I wanted to say something, to call out and remind her I was still here, that I'd heard every word, but I didn't. I just sat, shrinking into the chair, into myself. The only thing louder than her voice was my silence. And outside, the rain kept speaking for me. She was still talking when I finally stood. Her voice floated from the next room, lighter now, full of energy, a kind of joy that made my stomach ache. "I've been thinking we should repaint the kitchen too," she said, laughing. "It'll finally feel like my house." I stood in the center of the living room, where the light barely reached. The shadows had turned blue around the edges, soft and cold, like twilight had stained the walls. My eyes fell on the framed photo near the window. All of us, years ago, sunburned and smiling. I looked younger, she looked smaller, closer. Now she spoke of plans, of renovations and fresh starts, all without me. I was air, drifting between her sentences. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel rage rise in my chest. What I felt was thinner than that, quieter. I felt removed, like an umbrella left in a dry room, not broken, not torn, just not needed anymore. She was building a future, one decision at a time, and in that future, I was a name on the mailbox, nothing more. I walked slowly toward the window, pressing my fingers against the cold pane. The glass fogged slightly from my breath, a small human proof that I was still here. But she didn't see it, and maybe she didn't have to. I didn't cry loudly. There was no gasping, no trembling shoulders, no sharp sobs that shook the walls. Just the soft sound of air leaving my lungs and the warmth slipping quietly down my cheeks. I kept my hands folded in my lap, proper, polite, like I was sitting in church or waiting for someone to call my number at the pharmacy. The room was dim, only the gray light from outside slipping in between the curtains. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen like it didn't know anything had changed. Thunder rumbled far off. I didn't flinch. Tears came not from one moment, but from all of them. All the little ways I'd disappeared, the soft, invisible cuts. That didn't bleed until they all did at once. I didn't cry because I thought it would change anything. I cried because it wouldn't. My fingers hovered over the drawer before I touched it. The brass knob was cool to the touch, smooth, familiar. I hadn't opened it in years, but tonight, I needed to find something, anything that was still mine. The drawer slid open without a sound, like it had been waiting. Inside, everything was just as I remembered: loose paper clips, a cracked ruler, old stamps. Beneath them, folded carefully in the back, his will. I pulled it out, the creases deep, the edges slightly yellowed. His handwriting stared back at me, firm, unmistakable. And then, behind his papers, mine. I didn't even remember placing it there. But there it was, tucked away, dusty, forgotten, still with my name. The scent of aged paper rose up, mixing with the cedar lining of the drawer. A faint lamp flickered beside me, casting long gold shadows across the floor. I held the documents in my lap for a long moment, and for the first time that day, I didn't feel erased. I felt remembered. I was dusting the bookshelf, gently lifting each old novel like it might crumble in my hands. The scent of lemon polish clung to the air, mixing with the dry, whispery smell of old pages. The floor creaked under my steps, a familiar, slow sound that followed me from room to room. As I reached for the top shelf, something slipped free. A small folded paper fluttered to the floor like a leaf coming to rest. I bent to pick it up, brushing the corner gently. It was a drawing. Crayon lines, wobbly letters, a stick figure with two giant hearts for eyes. In pink crayon, she had written, "Me and Grandma." The handwriting tilted like it wasn't sure where to land, but the love in it didn't hesitate. My breath caught. I ran my thumb over the page, a smudge of purple near the corner where she'd gripped too hard. Her version of me had curly hair and a big smile, and somehow, despite everything, she'd made the hands holding hers just a little bigger, as if she remembered the feeling of safety more than the shapes. I sat down right there on the edge of the rug, not to cry, not to grieve, just to feel. It wasn't loud, not like the rest of the world has been lately, but in that quiet morning light, with her crooked hearts and crayon dreams in my hand, something inside me flickered, just enough to start again. She climbed onto the couch beside me, her fingers sticky from lunch, a smudge of jelly near her chin. She looked at me for a long second, her head tilted like she was studying the lines in my face. "Grandma," she said softly, "do you still write letters?" Her voice was so small, I almost missed it, so full of wonder, not knowing the ache I'd been carrying around like a stone in my chest. I blinked, surprised by the question. "I used to," I said. She smiled. "I think I would like to get one." I looked down at her knees curled into mine, the weight of her words pressing gently on my heart, not heavy, just real. It wasn't what she said. It was that she asked. That she still saw me as someone who had something to say. I smiled before I answered. Not because I had the words just yet, but because I remembered I once did. The typewriter sat in its old case, tucked beneath a pile of blankets in the corner of the room. I hadn't touched it in years, maybe longer, but my hands knew where to find the latch. They remembered the weight of it. I brought it to the desk near the window. The lace curtain fluttered gently in the afternoon breeze, the scent of vanilla lotion still lingering on my sleeves. When I opened the case, the air shifted, like time made room for me again. I pressed one key, then another. The sound, click, click, was sharp but steady, like the tap of a memory saying, "I'm still here." My fingers moved slower than they used to, but they moved, with purpose. The first words didn't come easily. They never do when you've been quiet too long. But I wasn't writing out of anger. I was writing because somewhere deep inside, I still had something left to say. And I'd nearly forgotten. This was how I said it. I didn't hide the papers. I didn't tuck them in a drawer or slide them under a stack of magazines. I just left them on the desk, beside the typewriter. Neat, undramatic, a clean draft, still warm from the night before. Mid-morning light filtered through the window, dappling, the wood with soft gold. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves, just enough to remind me I wasn't completely sealed off from the world. Her footsteps came down the hall. Slow, not hesitant, but not rushed either. I didn't turn, not yet. Then they stopped. Right at the doorway. There was a pause, a sharp inhale. I looked over my shoulder. She was staring at the papers. I didn't panic. I didn't explain. I just looked at her, the same way I used to when she scraped her knee and looked to me for truth. Only now, the truth was mine. Her eyes moved over the page, line by line, sentence by sentence. And then, she looked at me. We didn't speak, not right away. But I could feel it, the shift, the moment where something familiar breaks into something else. She found the will. Maybe by accident, maybe not. But some truths don't need hiding. They only need air. The paper trembled in her hand more than she probably wanted it to. "What is this supposed to mean?" she asked. Her voice hit the room like a drawer slammed shut. I stood by the window, watching the dust float in the sunlight. A single beam, cut through the space between us, soft and revealing. The tea I'd made sat forgotten, cooling next to her elbow. She held the papers like they'd turned against her. Not yelling, just sharp. "I found this next to your typewriter," she added, as if I didn't know where I'd placed it. I turned to face her. "It means I've remembered who I am." She blinked once, not enough to clear the air between us. "I don't understand," she said. "I know," I said quietly. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was just honest. I watched her try to find the right place to put her anger, but I wasn't offering that space anymore. The air between us stayed still. Even the sunlight didn't move. She waited for me to react, to soften, to backtrack, but I didn't. "I'm not angry," I said. I said it gently, not to soothe her, but because it was true. Just clear. The clock on the wall ticked. Not loud, but steady. A rhythm I hadn't noticed until just then. She shifted her weight, and the wood creaked beneath her. My words weren't sharp. They didn't slice. They simply landed, like a mirror, held up, and she looked like she saw something she didn't want to admit had been there all along. She opened her mouth and reached for the easy ones. "I've been busy. You misunderstood." I didn't mean it like that. Each phrase dropped into the space between us, but none of them settled. Even she didn't sound convinced. I just nodded, not coldly. Just done. I let her talk. Not because I was waiting to respond, but because I'd finally learned explanations don't fix what was never acknowledged. "This isn't about anger," I said, "and it's not punishment either." She was quiet now, but still listening. "I'm leaving pieces of myself to the people who never stopped seeing me. I watched her mouth tighten just slightly. My love hasn't gone away, I added. It's just not blind anymore. A bird chirped outside, its voice sharp and small against the hush of the house. She looked toward the window, but didn't speak. I'm still here, I said. Still giving, still listening, just not to silence. We stood there, no raised voices, no tears. She held the papers, I held the silence, and between us, truth settled into the space like a stone dropped on a rug. It didn't move, didn't shout. It just existed, undeniable, heavy, and finally, visible. The house still creaked in all the familiar places, the step near the hallway that sighed when I passed, the cabinet that never closed all the way. But the silence had changed. It no longer pressed against my ribs. It just settled. I began each morning the same way now, with a mug of lavender tea steeped just long enough to fill the kitchen with its soft scent. The lace curtains filtered the spring light across the table, casting dappled shapes that danced with the hum of the heater. I held the warmth of the mug in both hands and let it remind me I was still here. There was no rush, no waiting for a voice from the other room, no hunger for the sound of footsteps I used to long for. There was just me, the quiet, and the kind of peace that doesn't come with arrival. It comes with release. I didn't fill the room to prove I belonged in it. I just belonged. My fingers moved slowly at first, not from doubt, but from softness. Like learning to dance with myself again. The ink flowed steadily across the page, letters forming not for someone else, but just for me. Old stories, quiet thoughts. The kind of words I used to keep locked away for lack of time or space. Now they had both. The breeze caught the edge of the notebook and lifted it slightly, as if even the air knew I was writing something that mattered. I didn't need a reader. Didn't even need a purpose. Each page brought back a part of me I'd thought was lost. It hadn't been lost. It had just been waiting for me to come home. Twice a week, I sat in the little corner by the window at the library. The same patch of light spilled across the rug where the children gathered. Knees crossed, elbows brushing, wide eyes watching. Once upon a time, I'd begin, and their voices would hush as if I were casting a spell. They didn't know my story, not the chapters I held tight behind my smile, but they listened to my voice, to my rhythm. By the way, I told the dragon to sleep a little longer this time, and that was enough. I left each time with their laughter in my coat pocket and the feeling that I had given something real. I was still being heard. The blanket was violet, rich and deep, like a field of flowers just before the sun sets. I saw it in the shop window and didn't ask if it was too much. I didn't wonder if it would match the couch. I just bought it. That night, I curled up in the armchair. By the window, the blanket draped across my lap like a quiet affirmation. It was soft, heavier than it looked, like it knew how much I needed anchoring. I sipped chamomile tea and turned the pages of a book I'd already read twice. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't wait for someone to ask if I was cold. Had chosen comfort, and it felt like choosing myself. I used to think love meant holding on, waiting, proving, but love doesn't beg, it doesn't chase. It just is. It shows up in the small moments. The kind you don't have to earn, the kind you don't have to ask for twice. I've learned that love is not owed, it is recognized, and when it isn't, that says more than absence ever could. I still believe in love, just not the kind that makes you disappear to keep it. Now, I see myself clearly. And I will always honor my worth, even if others won't. Thank you for sitting with me a while. If you're over 50, drop your age and where you're watching from. I'd truly love to know who's listening. And if any part of this reminded you of your own journey, I hope you'll share it in the comments below. Subscribe for more of Grandma's tales. I've lived a life full of lessons, and I'd be honored to pass a few along to you.